replete with sections like this, which says without a hearing or without taking representations from the person prior to making an action. And what we would say is that we would want to see language in the legislation that safeguards rights. You have to apply to the court. You have to obtain a warrant. You would have to take representations or reasonable representations from the regulated entity, or you would allow the person an opportunity to be heard. Again, excellent piece of legislation, very comprehensive piece of legislation, but the powers of this commission is expansive, and we're not satisfied that there is adequate provisions safeguarding the due process rights of persons who are regulated under this act.
Recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Mr. President, I rise to support the bill and to commend the administration for bringing this this bill to the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a very important step in modernizing the financial market with respect to debt and equity, as well as like the previous senator said, regulating the sector. And that, as we know, is to bring confidence so that would have the type of information they would need to make informed decisions about investments, raising capital, debt, equity, whatever it is. This is something that the business community has been lobbying for a long time. I think over 4 years now, they've been in discussions with government, and so it's something that is very much welcome. It certainly gives the option, other than commercial banks, to raise money either through debt, bonds, or through equity, other investors. And so it's certainly a bill that I think we enthusiastically support. Hopefully it will also put pressures on the commercial banks to become more efficient, to lower their spread, and again, open up other options for those who want to invest or raise money in any other way. Like I said, it will create trust because there'll be additional financial information. There'll be audits. There'll be required third-party audits. And there'll also be significant penalties for fraud, manipulation, things like using insider information to unfairly. And so again, it's a whole process of modernizing the sector. And so we want to commend the administration for bringing this bill about. We think that it's an extremely important step in terms of Belize developing in this area. And so we certainly support this bill today.
I recognize Senator Osmani Salas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I rise to express my support for this bill as well, as my colleagues before me have done. I listened intently to the presentation from Senator Perifit and Senator Bradley. I thank you for raising all those points, and I look forward to the response from the government side. I must admit that I knew very little about securities markets, securities industry, Mr. President, before this bill was brought to us. So I reached out along with some of my colleagues, and I must thank Senator Minister Koi for giving us a very helpful presentation. Really made a difference. And also to a colleague from the private sector who is very knowledgeable on capital markets and securities industries. And that was very helpful. So with all that, new knowledge that I gained, I have no problem at all to give my full support to this bill. I would like to make a few points though on what next. And my understanding of this is that policing will be key. And the IFSC, which will now be the FSC, will have added responsibilities. So we need to make sure that they have the resources that they need to be, as a regulator, they will need to be strengthened. I would also like to suggest that moving forward, and I see that it will be a function of the FSC under this bill to engage in education and awareness. I would say that there is a need for financial literacy led by the FSC and with the support of the private sector. I think that is an important function that must be carried out. And I'm also advised that it will be very important to ensure that there is training for market players, training in capital markets and the opportunities and what that means. And one last thing, and it has to do with offenses. Offenses have been stipulated for all the various sections here, and I would like to hear, and I do understand that in developing this bill, we reached out to CARTAC, the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, one of the IMF Regional Technical Assistance Centers, for support. And we were also made to understand that a draft bill was shared with the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission. So all that, I'm sure, has helped to make this a sound piece of legislation. No? But in terms of offenses, I'm not sure it would be helpful to hear how we came up with the levels. In the case of an individual, a fine up to $100,000, and in the case of a body corporate, a fine up to $500,000. From what I've read and irregularities that have happened in other parts of the world, it could very well be that 100,000 or 500,000 could be a drop in the bucket, and really, those that have committed irregularities would be more than happy to pay these sums. So I know we are just starting, and I'm pretty sure that if and when the need is determined to modify and to increase these, that could be done via amendments. But I support the bill, and I look forward to the responses from the government side. Thank you, Mr. President.
I recognize the Honorable Senator Christopher Coy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Just a minute.
Sorry.
I recognize Senator Christopher Coy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam President, I rise in support of this bill. This has been a work in progress for quite a number of years. I think the central bank took conduct of this effort a few years ago and enlisted or engaged the assistance of CARTAC. And a draft bill was pulled together, I think, as late as last year. It probably might have been worked on from before, but there was a rough draft already from last year. This is as Senator Bradley explains, quite a comprehensive piece of securities industry legislation. To give a little the purpose of this is to support capital market development in Belize. There have been rudimentary examples or efforts of capital market development. We have the public utilities that have issued debentures. We have the municipalities that have issued securities as well. And you also have a couple other businesses that have gotten into the fray. But at this point in time, there is really no exchange. There's no active bond market, no secondary market to really speak of. And as well, there is the concern of the consumer/investor, the person who would otherwise buy these securities. The securities industry bill is, through the efforts of CARTAC, after, in a sense, my own research, largely copied from the Bahamas securities industry law. And it looks at its development more as a conduct type regulation legislation as opposed to prudential regulation legislation, which is more the purview of the central bank and its regulation of the banking sector. So that's where this dichotomy or bifurcation of this type of activity arises. And that is really at this point internationally acknowledged, but as best practice. The UK, for example, had a financial services authority that had looked at being responsible for a broader scope, a comprehensive scope, but they ultimately split their regulation into those two areas, a prudential regulation authority and a financial conduct authority. This legislation seeks to protect our reputation in one sense by creating a structure, a legislative structure for securities business in Belize, but at the same time looks to protect as well not only the reputation of Belize by that structure, but by regulating conduct. It seeks to provide or protect that consumer or that investor who would buy those securities. What it does is it, in effect, requires disclosure, and it requires third-party involvement in the assessment of a security. So it does require audited, if a business is looking to issue securities to the public, it requires the prospectus, but it does require the audited financials to be supported, and it does provide for registration of those securities. It lays out in relative detail some of the, or what those requirements are for those issuers. For the securities business, it provides for a process for ensuring that they conduct their securities business prudently. Connected to that is obviously the investigative and enforcement provisions. As Senator Salas explained, it was quite helpful for us to get the insight not only of the Bahamas Securities Commission, but also the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission as well. But in developing the legislation and that those provisions that the senators have referred to, it's important to bear in mind that protection, the protection of the investor and their monies. And so far as the flight or the ease of the flight of capital, it becomes all the more important that there is some level of stealth in the investigation of perhaps or potentially fraudulent activities being conducted by whether an issuer or securities business. So that is where the underlying basis is in the way that this legislation is drafted. But ultimately, it permits for due process. So the stealth is required, but it recognizes the importance ultimately of due process. So that, I think, in the broadest terms is what we're looking at here. That legislation being put forward, this securities industry bill being put forward in a manner that meets international best practices, that seeks to secure the reputation of Belize by a structured approach to securities business operations, and that at the same time protects the investor by the provisions that it lays out in the bill. Thank you very much.
Madam President, I first of all, again, thank Senator Cowie for his exposition, which is most helpful. Just to respond very quickly to some of the issues, I think Senator Bradley has already put the concerns raised by Senator Perifit in the proper context. Senator Perifit referred to the powers of investigation, etc., but those powers can only be exercised in relation to an investigation that is ongoing. And Section 120 or Clause 121 says, the Commission may conduct such investigation as it considers necessary or expedient for any of the following purposes: to determine whether any person has contravened or is contravening or is about to contravene this act, to determine whether a person may have committed a breach of trust, fraud, or misconduct in carrying out securities business, to determine whether a regulated person has engaged or is engaging in any activity in the securities market in a manner that is not in the public interest, for the administration of this act, or to assist in the administration of the securities legislation of another jurisdiction. Madam President, it is difficult to contemplate scenarios in which the Commission is investigating whether a person has committed a breach of trust, fraud, misconduct, is engaged in matters and activity that is not in the public interest, that you will give the person notice and say, hey, I'm investigating you to find out whether you are involved in fraud. We have to understand what we're talking about here. As Senator Herrera has quite rightly pointed out, this is where persons who are making a market, regardless of the type of security, will go to the public and say, hey, here is a project, here is a bond, here is a share certificate, etc. Give me your money and I will invest it. The Commission then has an obligation, it is set out very clearly. In Section 9, sorry. Section 9, I believe it is. To advise the functions of the Commission, to advise the Minister on all matters relating to capital markets, maintain surveillance over the capital markets and ensure orderly, fair, and equitable trading in securities, foster timely, accurate, fair, efficient disclosure of information to the investing public and capital markets, protect the integrity of the capital markets against any abuses arising from financial crime, market misconduct, and other unfair and improper practices. So we're talking about a power that is given to a Commission to ensure that when people's money is being taken up, they have the ability to move with speed, to move efficiently, to move without giving the so alleged wrongdoers notice that they are collecting information on them, and then to move in order to protect the public interest. So I stress that, as Senator Bradley pointed out, it is only in relation to a investigation, because 121, which Senator Perfit highlighted, says, if the commission considers that a person is or may be able to give information or produce a document which is or may be relevant to an investigation, then it sets out the power. So the commission has to determine that the person has information relevant to an investigation. For an investigation to start, they must have some basis that requires further investigation. I want to turn now to the enforcement under 137 and onwards. You will see, Madam President, that it says, in addition to all the powers given to the Commission under this Act, and without prejudice to any other action that may be instituted, the Commission may, by notice in writing and without a hearing, give a direction to a person if it appears to the Commission that it is desirable for the protection of investors. A person is contravening, has contravened, or is about to contravene any provision or requirement under this Act. A person has failed to comply with any provision. A person is in purported compliance with a provision of requirement has furnished the Commission with information that is false, inaccurate, and misleading. So the powers of enforcement are premised on the Commission having information in its possession that it is moving to protect investors, that a person has contravened the Act, they have failed to comply with the provisions of the Act, or the person who they are going after has provided false, inaccurate, and misleading information. And then the sections set out in extenso what the powers of the Commission may be, without a hearing. So the Commission has to have its information, conduct an investigation, and realize that somebody can help with information or somebody is doing something wrong, act with urgency, and then due process is afforded. I will simply say this, Senator Bradley, as you would know, because we have been involved in cases like this, where the Central Bank of Belize has the power in relation to financial institutions to issue directives, to issue measures without giving the bank any notice, takes immediate effect. But in all of these cases, the bank, credit union, or other financial institution is not denied the right of access to the court. And the courts are replete with cases where these orders have been given, and before they comply, they go urgently to court and say, the central bank is acting in excess of its powers, or some other regulatory body, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is acting in excess of its powers. They want me to disclose this information, but for the following reasons, I should not. And the court acts very quickly to determine whether or not you should be called upon to comply or not. And finally, with respect to self-incrimination raised by Senator Bradley, the Constitution guarantees every person the right not to incriminate himself or herself, and this Act does not purport to, nor could it take away that constitutional right. So I would invite colleagues, members of the Senate, that as we are starting out, embarking on a new capital market formation project, that we should err on the side of caution and protecting the integrity of the market, protecting the public interest, and to support the legislation because it creates an opportunity for businesses and individuals to raise money, to invest, to put their money, rather than sitting in the bank doing nothing really and getting no interest, to put their money in productive and other commercial endeavors, and to have a commission that is strong and can regulate the industry and protect the public interest. I think we need, as we are starting out, to err on the side of caution. I ask that the question be put, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to provide for the regulation of securities business and activities and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to provide for the regulation of securities, business, and activities, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
Recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Police Revised Edition 2011 to increase the penalty for the offence of spreading or publishing false news and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, the bill is very short. It raises the fine to $3,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 6 months.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to increase the penalty for the offence of spreading or publishing false news, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. I think the ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2011, to increase the penalty for the offence of spreading or publishing false news and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Misuse of Drugs Act, Chapter 103 of the Substantive Laws of Police Revised Edition 2011, to establish licensing, registration, and operation requirements for the cultivation, processing, distribution, and delivery of cannabis products for adult use, to provide for the Minister to make regulations for the monitoring and enforcement of any regulations to the Act, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, in the interest of time, I won't go into an introduction, save to say that this is building upon a previous amendment under the previous administration that had imperfectly provided for the personal use of marijuana. We now move to a situation where we provide a full range of regulation and operation for personal use, for growing, and for the sale of this product.
Senator Michael Purfeet.
Madam President, the Leader of Government Business can just say this is another UDP initiative, you know. That's all he has to say. Indeed, Madam President, what we had before was not imperfect, but I believe it was as far as we could go at the time. I don't know, at the time we had a system whereby if you were able to source your 10 grams or less, you're allowed to smoke it in the privacy of your own home or the privacy of some other person's home, not in public places, and keep it away from children to smoke marijuana. How you source it, how you produce it, how you have it, that's where the difficulty always came in. Because of a number of different reasons, the way how marijuana is defined in the UN and how we deal with it from a money perspective. I know what the government is trying to do. I hope that the government could accomplish what they're trying to do, but I'm thinking that maybe they should be very careful as to how fast they move with this, given the different problems that we could experience. Madam President, I am on record. I am on record as saying I completely support the idea of full legalization of marijuana. I don't think that it is the worst drug that we consume. I like to say I do worse than marijuana. I drink rum, and history has shown, the records have shown that Alcohol is far worse than marijuana. So if that's your choice of recreation, then you should have full access to it, a safe place to buy it, a safe place to consume it, without having to worry about law enforcement. However, Madam President, life is real and the world is real. As this government, who desperately needs a shot in the arm, embark on this very ambitious program, and as I look at this piece of legislation, you look at section 49D, because you have the personal use, and then you have every person who desires, according to 49D, to grow cannabis plants for commercial purposes in Belize, shall apply in writing to the commission or for a cultivation license. So, in essence, you apply for the right to grow it. Not just smoke it, but grow it. And for commercial purposes, it means you sell it. You could sell it. It says projected income statement, financial support, and capabilities. Who will be managing your place? So, this bill, in my view, gives people the right to plant marijuana and sell it. Which brings into question, how do they conduct business? Unfortunately, for better or for worse, and the United States has this same problem. It's not a problem that will be new to Belize. But how do you operate with it from a financial perspective in terms of getting it into the formal financial system? I think the Minister of Home Affairs, correct me if I'm wrong, for those of you who listen to him on that side, the Minister of Home Affairs had said that they would be opening up a credit union to deal with this, for example, to allow people to use that facility if they want to conduct business with marijuana. The problem is, credit unions have the majority of their money with a local bank, a deposit. A large part of their deposits are in the local banks, and these local banks have corresponding banking requirements that could frown upon that kind of business. All I am saying, when you look at this piece of legislation, can the government tell us? And I know as well that steps are being taken for Congress in the United States to allow the legality of marijuana at the federal level, but there is no evidence that that will come online anytime soon. Hopefully it does to help us, but if it doesn't, then how does a person who is in the marijuana cultivation and business and to use it or to deal with it commercially, how do you deal with it as a business if you can't do banking? What's that? Bitcoin? Well, you understand, Madam Speaker? Bitcoin. I really know how to write that check. We'll talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all those sophisticated ways of doing it. Like I said, if you could figure out a way to handle the financial aspect of it, then good, because I am totally in support of the concept. But the government has to be careful that while it may be doing the right thing in order to do the thing right. So you don't want pressures to be brought on our banks. We don't want corresponding banks not wanting to deal with Belize. And I implore upon the government that before you bring it into the mainstream, please make sure that when we put it in the financial system, whether by Bitcoin or whichever kind of coin you have, however you do it, it doesn't affect the other financial structures we have in place that are very important to Belize, just to satisfy one industry that you want to promote. I understand that, I support it, but we must be careful that in doing that, we don't create other problems within the economy. For example, medical marijuana has been on the books for umpteen years, you know. For umpteen years, a medical doctor in Belize could prescribe and even grow marijuana for supply for medical purposes, but no doctors want to touch it because how do you bank the money? No banks will deal with them. Nobody will want to be engaged with them unless there is some new kind of financial world that hopefully, as people get licenses to do these things, they also get a training in how to deal with the money. Training in how to not only cultivate it and sell it and deal with it, but how to deal with the money, I think it will be very, very important. Madam President, there's a statement here that, man, I didn't see any definition of it in the interpretation section. It says here, there is established an Industrial Hemp and Cannabis Control Commission in the ministry responsible for narcotics control to oversee the registration and licensing of activities on the department. So there will be a commission. The commission shall be comprised of not less than 5, but no more than 10 experts qualified in the narcotics industry, appointed by the minister. What do you mean by qualified in the narcotics industry? Madam President, are these seasoned narcotics dealers you'll be putting on the commission? What do you mean by qualified in the narcotics industry? We have to be very careful with these wordings. And these people, that qualification will be very subjective. And the minister can appoint anybody who she or he wants and remove anybody at the drop of a hat. So you have this very important commission overseeing a narcotics industry in the country, but those members of that commission can easily be appointed and removed by the minister. Madam President, we go back again to this so-called Plan Belize. Big in your Plan Belize, big in your manifesto was the removal of ministerial discretion and interference. You said that the legislation that you would be passing would limit or eliminate, in most cases, the powers of ministers to just do things. But in this piece of legislation, you have a minister who would have the power to just add and remove a commission member without giving any reason at all. And that qualification would be totally within the subjective belief of the minister himself or herself. There's no standard by which a person becomes qualified or disqualified. I mean, at least put people on that commission so it can be a joint thing. I don't know, a member of the opposition, maybe the unions, maybe a church member, a person from the business community. So you got to put a commission on there, like the PUC, and you stagger it. People are there for 2 years, 4 years, whatever, and then you have representation from the government. Put majority representation on it if you want. You can have up to 10. Majority government if you want. But have representation on that commission from the opposition, from the churches, from the business, from the unions, similar to what we have in the Senate. And I think that would make it more meaningful rather than 10 minions appointed by the minister who may have not the kind of experience in narcotics that we want them to have. So those are my concerns, Madam President, and I thank you.
I recognize Senator Bishop Moses Mbengushe.
Madam President, it has been a long day, and I pause because I want to be very deliberate. And and very careful in what I say. Recognizing also that the camera is on me. And recognizing that perhaps whatever I say as the person representing the church will no doubt be quoted by the time I leave this building this evening. To be honest with you, Madam President, it is one that, to a large extent, I don't know if I should use the word I dreaded. But I am here representing the church. I want to indicate that before all this, yes, I must respectfully say that we were in some meetings with the government. And I want to be clear insofar as that aspect is concerned. And I say that because at the same time, it is not to say that in those consultations, the church did not make itself clear as to its position. However, we did realize that this was coming and that perhaps it was important to be able to have some kind of dialogue and communication with the government insofar as this was concerned. The Belize Council of Churches did make its contribution and some comments known. And I want to turn to 49D and the section there, 3A. The applicant is 21 years or older. The commission shall grant a cultivation license if the applicant is 21 years or older. I think I will have to look through to also be able to understand it is not only those who will be granted license, but the whole initial use. And I would also like to point out, Madam President, that I see the terms here being used interchangeably, and I'm not quite clear why, between cannabis and hemp, and I'm not quite certain I have seen the term marijuana, but it seems to be they're used differently at different times. I am not here into the whole issue of what I would say, the bank structure, etc. I am merely here to state the church's position on what we have said before in the past, that we are not comfortable with going in this direction at this time. And while, as I have said, we have made our comments, recognizing that this would come before us, we are still not comfortable with where we are insofar as where the government is going with this piece of legislation. However, it is before us. And one of the things I can say, Madam President, is that we wonder, based on what I see here, I wonder if 10 or 15 years from now, if the government, or if the, I will not say the government, but I will say if the country will be better off with what we have before us. I merely ask that ambiguous question. And as much as it might be ambiguity, I am still concerned. And I continue to share that concern because one of the things that I would like to have seen, and is perhaps mentioned by Senator Perfit, is, or I don't know if he did, I want to be clear as to what is the substantive oversight. The bodies that will be put in place to monitor, the commission, whatever it is. And I say that because the church in the past has been, or has engaged in some things where the church was assured, oh, we will put X, Y, Z in place in order to monitor and guide the process. And that is the reason why I made the comment, what will happen 10 or 15 years from now? Madam President, this is before us. But as a church, and as a representative of the church, and even with the discussions we have had with the government, I am not quite sure that we can support this. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Luke Martinez.
Thank you. Madam President, we have some questions that needs to be answered about this bill. We want to know how will we ensure financial and legal support, because we'll be managing a new industry. Will there be a research and development fund to manage all of this? The quality of production is not mentioned in this bill. We know that in the citrus sector, your product have to meet a certain quality or not your product spoil, right? So that is not mentioned here. And then we go to section 49.1, which this is a concern, which one, it makes reference to narcotics industry, right? So under which ministry would that fall under? I don't know that we have a ministry, a narcotics department that this would go under. So that is what we have a concern there. So which ministry will be responsible for that industry? Maybe the Ministry of Police, we don't know. Another concern that we have here is the commission. There is no provision for the inclusion for at least a bipartisan approach, and an approach that would include all of the sectors that needs to be involved. For example, the opposition, the social partners. That is not mentioned in the commission. It is just telling us that the commission could be anywhere from 5 to 10 members. And then it goes on to give the minister the power to remove the members of the commission. right? So that needs to be addressed before we go forward. It's just, this reminds us of what was going to happen, or the attempt that was made on the Public Service Commission and these other commissions via the 10th Amendment, right? So this certainly is a red flag, Madam President, and so we definitely need clarity on that.